Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina. Behavior analysis is a science of behavior. And Doug Kostewicz.
Focus on the individual, and you're going to see focus on behavior.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hello everybody and welcome to ABA On Call. Well Doug, tonight we have a very controversial subject that we're going to be talking about, and this is something that has affected teachers, many other people, based off of this particular book, and that is a book called Punished by Rewards, which was written by Alfie Kohn. And I would like, we have a lot to unpack today. And I'm just going to start off by asking you to give us a very high-level overview of what does it mean to be punished by rewards. Now, I'm not going to ask you to recount the whole book because it's a big one. And Kohn, he talks about a lot of things in this book, but he makes some very bold points about behavior, and it's had a lot of impact. So what do you got for us?
So if you want me to go to the top, and that is children, the focus here is education, but children lose motivation for doing academic activities if they are rewarded for those activities. And when you use punishments, it is detrimental to the child's educational experience. If you're going to look at the highest level, we need to stop using those types of things because we want to build the intrinsic motivation of education for this, learning for the sake of learning for the child. We're damaging those experiences for those children.
Yeah. Listening to you talk and just say that part, that I believe covers the punished by rewards component. Now, just a little side note, in 1993, when this book was published, there was a young Rick who was at Ohio State University working on his master's degree, and I was so incensed at the things that were being said that I wrote, my one and only time, I wrote a letter to the editor. And I had a couple of my professors at Ohio State do some editing, and it didn't get published. But boy, was I upset about some of these the content, because back then, and to this point, I was super gung-ho. And what you just described is very counter to what we understand in behavior analysis. And the rewards just substitute that for reinforcer. And Kohn isn't just talking about reward; he's talking about reinforcers, and he is making very bold claims. And this is for teachers, but he's saying these are very counterproductive. They're damaging kids, and if you do it, you are a bad person.
And
that is
very harsh. And it is not necessarily counterintuitive, but it goes against many years of teacher training, especially within special education, as we think since the 70s and 80s, and how we interact with children, and trying to tie those, as you said, rewards, but like you said, replacing it with reinforcement, trying to tie that to certain behaviors so that we begin to see those effective behaviors rather than the errors that are done through academics for trying to teach the right way to do things. So it is very counter to how teachers are taught. So in 93, when this came out, and to this day, I would argue, still provides a constant struggle and a constant argument. And I will remind you, Rick, a young Doug and a young Rick attended a presentation by Alfie Kohn while at Ohio State for no more than, what was it, about 20 minutes before we had to just exit stage left.
You know what? This is going to be sad, but I totally don't remember doing that. Wow. I'm going to have to think on that. But damn, now that you're saying that, I do kind of vaguely remember something. Kohn, here's the thing. He is a journalist, and there are many journalists out there who are looking for ways of talking about things and getting their argument out. And the science of human behavior, as you know, and as all of our listeners know, it's complex. It is very complex. And behavior analysis, before Kohn, the things that he said, he didn't invent these things. He's just translating what the research is. And as a good journalist, he's hyping it up. He's selling, he's selling his books. He's selling his presentations. And he is making lots of claims because, I'm sure he believes this. And it's not like he made it up, but there is research out there. A lot of the research is from DC and Ryan, who were social psychologists. And, we just don't have enough time to talk about all of that research and how, behavior analysts have looked at that research and critically analyzed it and provided counter evidence to it. But, Kohn made, the thing with people who talk about things in psychology, it's not like everything he said was wrong. If someone said to you, hey, if you punish people, that's not going to be good in developing relationships. Wow, really? I mean, he gets it, and that's not surprising to us. I'm being a little cheeky here.
Well, how about the other one when he said we really should have good curriculum to make education worthwhile for kids? I don't think you're going to find a lot of people standing up and saying, hey, make this curriculum horrible. Make it not worthwhile. Nobody's going to say that. And he is making a correct statement. So, and there are some other things that are kind of splattered within the book that I also argue he's right for the wrong reasons. And when I've read what he's had to say, I don't argue with it. I argue with his rationale and where he goes with it. So one of his one point that he brings up, and I don't know if it's necessarily in this book, but he's brought it out before, is our overuse of the term good job, right? And he says, you shouldn't just be walking around saying good job, good job, good job. I think any behavior analyst is totally going to agree with that. Does that mean that praise is bad? What type of praise are we using? What's our schedule of reinforcement for that praise? So it's this notion that there's little bits and pieces that are very attractive and we can agree with it, but it doesn't go far enough, and his rationale behind. And some of the claims, like you said, are just blatantly misleading.
Yeah. This has made a big impact in teacher education, but it's gone beyond that. It's gone into the job sector, and some of the things that he talks about, I think, line up with some of the things that behavior analysts have said. For example, there's this really cool YouTube clip, which I recommend people watch if they haven't, with Aubrey Daniels. And he talks about the problem with having the employee of the month, which has been, in the job sector, lots of people have used that to motivate. And Kohn talks about this too. And they're right in the sense that that's not the most effective way. Like reinforcement, you don't want to just reinforce one person's behavior. You want to reinforce as many as you can, as frequently as you can. And the problem with, as you said, with Kohn, some of the things that he says are correct, but for some of the wrong reasons. He talks about, he refers to it as extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And he'll say that if you are getting a reward or reinforcer, you're only going to do what it takes to do that, and you're never going to do something else. And again, that simplistic understanding of boiling down behavior analysis to something really simple like, oh, I have to pick up my pencil. Sure, but when we talk about more complex behavior, that's when things start to get a little more opaque, and it's not as clear as I'm going to do this simple behavior, reinforcement occurs. But yet, to him, he treats all of it the same.
Another aspect that he talks about is when a teacher will provide feedback to children, we don't want that because then we're creating kids to people please, right? We're trying to please that teacher. But you and I both know when a student receives feedback from someone who knows how to do that thing, they're not necessarily trying to please that person. They're trying to correct or change or shape or whatever that behavior towards some outcome that would be beneficial to that individual. If someone's constantly writing 2 + 2 is 5, then that needs to be correct. It's not going to magically become corrected by itself. So if someone's there to say, hey, you did a great job, you wrote 2 + 2 = 4, that lets them know it's correct. But it can also be done incorrectly in that interaction. So there's this constant struggle with he's kind of, like you said, giving just enough and then pulling it back and then providing these other reasons rather than looking at it more complexly. Should we be reinforcing a child at age 12 for 2 + 2 = 4? No. That's way past where its behavior is established. That's on some large schedule of contingency. We can move to new behaviors. We can move to other things. So that notion that you're trying to impress upon or approval from, we don't run into that with coaches in sports, right? Where someone's swinging the bat incorrectly and you've got a professional who's saying you need to come at this angle or this. It's not about impressing the person. It's about doing the behavior a certain way to meet the greatest outcome for that individual.
Well, for those of you who are listening to this episode and would like credit, let me share the first secret word, which is claims.
Let's talk about, so we have these claims, we have these books. It's been, like you said, almost 30 years since these were published. There have to be some impacts. You and I both know there are. So what are some impacts of this information in the world?
Yeah. Books that are highly celebrated and that sell a lot, that means that people are deriving value from that and they're taking something from it. So we know with this book being a staple in colleges of education, I have seen this referenced a lot. Parents, the workforce, it's had an impact. And I'll start off and talk about what I have dealt with a lot, and that's in the College of Education and working with teachers. For years there has been this divide in I've been in special education for my career, and in general education, the divide can be seen in the way that, well, lots of ways, but certainly you'll see more behavioral friendly and behavior analytic discourse in special education, where you see a lot less of it in general ed. And so when this was published, there's just a welcome audience for hearing things like, oh, if you're using these extrinsic motivators, you're going to damage children. And the way you have to help them, and you alluded to this earlier, is you have to be creative and you have to look at coming up with interesting tasks. And not only, yes, that's true that it'd be great if we had interesting tasks, but when it comes to educating children and you're trying to tell teachers don't provide any kind of praise, that is very damaging in all of our life. And this is the thing that's hypocritical about some of the things that Kohn says. I'm sure when he reads the reviews, he's loving the ones that are positive, which are praising him, and the ones that are negative, he is actively writing against that and pushing back. So, praise is just an incredible part of how we interact with one another, how we develop relationships. So I believe that for those teachers that have embraced this notion and a lot of the things that have been said, they've gone down the wrong path. And I feel bad for the teachers and I feel bad for the children that were in those classrooms where, yes, you have this person that's trying to do some good things, but ultimately has their hands tied because some of the most fundamental ways of motivating people they're being told that that's rotten.
Right. So interesting impact. As with you, Rick, I've spent my time in special education, but I interact with dual certified teachers. So they've spent half their career in general education, regular education, and they're now becoming certified in special education. And we catch them towards the end of their career with special education. So I have them read some works by Alfie Kohn and I have them react to it and we talk about it. And it's very interesting to hear their initial response to notions of stop saying good job, stop giving all these. Half of my class celebrates that they thought they were doing it wrong the whole time. Thank goodness I don't have to praise these kids anymore. Thank goodness I can't. And then another percentage of kids begin to feel horrible that they've done that. And then about 25% are, this is not right, right? We have to do this. Because you think about special education students, individuals that are in special education, generally they're more often less successful at academics than more successful. So if they need to be taught how to do things, they're not going to just derive correctness. They need to be let know. Now, it's interesting because we have that conversation and I explain, just like we did in the previous segment of, the impact is you're taking just the bare minimum and not the deeper understanding. So I see teachers and I see parents. I spent time working with foster care, adoptive care, as a behavior analyst. And you saw parents that were justified in not being nice. The message they took away from this was not an effective, ineffective, intrinsic, extrinsic. It was, oh my goodness, I don't have to be nice. This is great. And they don't even hear the message of, oh, we really shouldn't be punishing them either, or we should use effective teaching. They just hear, I'm ruining my kids, so now I don't have to praise them. Oh my goodness, it's very frustrating. And I'm sure that you've experienced some of those same frustrations, both in an educational setting, parent setting, or as a behavior analyst working with residential staff. That type of notion of, wow, I don't have to do this because, well, let's, a little behavior analytic here, right? We talk about the ineffectiveness or when you program in sort of punishments. But remember, when you move to those, and when I begin to use those more, I guess, negative techniques, they become very reinforcing to the person delivering those. So it becomes this wow, I don't have to do that. So now I begin to use these other techniques, and all of a sudden I get to be very reinforced in the moment for using these techniques that may not have the best outcomes for the situation. So
Yeah.
I don't think you can go, I mean, you can go more into it, I'm sure, but there's devastating impacts because of the misunderstandings.
Yeah. I mean, my personal history, I originally, going back to when I was a student, first reading about behavior analysis, not knowing anything about the field when I was just a young undergrad, and I was reading these books, and I finally started to understand, what was being said about behavior analysis. And then later, as I started to dive into Skinner and see this, embrace this idea that we have this technology of behavior change that can be used to help people live better lives in many different ways. That's what psychology generally is about. Behavior analysis does it in a very specific way. So this book, saying behaviorism, as it's called, not behavior analysis, behaviorism doesn't work. It doesn't help children become good people. Don't do anything that weirdo Skinner's doing. And, Kohn has said as much about Skinner. And that has, as you point out, been welcomed by many people that, A, don't understand behavior analysis at all and want to just cast it aside, because then you don't need to know anything about it and you can go back to doing the things that you want to do.
Well,
How can you create a classroom, or how can you raise your children when you have Kohn saying things like, children do not learn to be moral by learning to obey rules that others make for them? There's this nativistic notion that we are all inherently good. We're born with this moral compass, and if we're just put in these conditions, it's just going to come out that way. Let me tell you, for those of you that don't believe that the environment can affect behavior, I mean, just look at these groups that are spewing hate, and just look at these groups that are in these echo tunnels or echo chambers, and you can see reinforcement in the praise and all of that right in front of you. So it has these effects insidious effects in education, working with parents. And while I understand why this book was written and the motivations behind it, it still fires me up to this day to think about the people who have been swayed by the arguments in it.
Well, and if you look at almost a larger impact just against behavior analysis, there's a constant and continuous linking between rewards and punishments. If you begin to implement and manipulate those, he attributes it to animals. Everything is responded to things, and I read an article, and so yeah, that's great if you say you did really great, and the kid goes woof. Wait a minute, what are you talking about? Why is it an equation to this notion of animals? So I don't want to go into behavior now, but that's another more global impact that let's just spew misunderstandings and distill behaviorism and behavior analysis to we're just dealing with animals. And so that's that would be I think a good impact. But let's give them their second word if they're getting your CEUs. And the second word is impact.
A good word. We're ready then, with that secret word, to move into the last segment here. And I feel we've done this a few times with our shows, and I think it's valuable talking about, as behavior analysts, when we confront these issues that are going to affect us. If you're a behavior analyst and you're working in a school, if you're working with parents, if you're working in the industry, in other words, if you're anybody working anywhere, this could potentially impact you. What's some advice? What are some things we can do to address these misconceptions and these issues that can arise from people like Kohn in his work?
I'm going to take it on first, Rick. What do you say? All right.
Yeah.
So I get to do this with a couple times yearly with teachers, like I mentioned. They come in with this, wow, I'm doing it the right way because I'm not doing it. Or I'm really frustrated because I'm doing it. I'm told not to do it. And the first tack that I take is what we've done here. And that is, let's highlight some of these positive things that Alfie says. Not because they're positive, but because they are ways not to do it. So, for example, I'll say, yeah, don't over-rely on non-descriptive praise, like good job. That is ineffective because, one, you're not looking at the schedule of reinforcement. Two, you're not providing any description and tying that praise to any certain behavior. So I begin to present the good aspects and then deconstruct them back to behavior analysis. And so you're not disparaging the messenger, and because many of the people that you will come in contact with as a behaviorist, they're going to say, well, this wonderful person, and so are you going to go, attack the character? Probably not going to work. If you're going to just say, no, that's horrible, it's not going to work. So work from within. Use what he says that's effective, and then move away from the other aspects and be ready to address how those are not. If you go back to that other way, no, that's not really the way it is. So I'll ask questions. Oh, can you see intrinsic motivation? How do you even know what's going on? What's going on there? What do you want to see? Is it effective? Have they learned how to do the behavior? So you ask questions and you move forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing how you combat this.
Well, you certainly, I think you laid out a strategy that I would endorse and something that I would do. Early on in my career, I was a debate people. I shouldn't say early on. I've done this for a while. Debating people, getting out there and providing this passionate response, showing how this is right, this is wrong. I think there's a place for that in our society. But depending on how that's done, a lot of times when that tends to move into yelling matches and, it just completely falls apart and it's name calling, ad hominems, all of that. Well, that might be some kind of entertaining, Jerry Springer-ish kind of TV. I guess I'm dating myself with that reference. I don't even know if he's on anymore. But you get it, the kind of trashy TV where people are yelling at each other. That will draw people's attention, but ultimately you're not going to win hearts and minds that way. And parents or teachers, they want to help their children. And as I continue to try to be more sophisticated in my approach to these issues, considering that people are rational actors and they are acting in a way that their environment has shaped, that's always so helpful because then you can say, what are things that are appealing to that person and what would be a way to help get an in to not tell someone to completely overturn what they believe, because you're just not going to do that. You're not going to do that. Someone who believes something and has believed it for a long time, you coming in there with your data or whatever is not going to overturn. But if you can just get a little in and start moving the needle and showing them that, hey, look, here's this thing, and you could get them to try it, and it's technically sound, then that's where the reinforcement from their perspective might happening. And that's a way that you can make some change. And it's not easy. And I wish I had a solution that worked, because oftentimes, we go into these places and, it's us against whomever. And that's always a challenge. But what you said in the things that I've been thinking about, moving in and gently trying to provide evidence and procedures, more procedures, that's the way to go.
I like something else as well, and I didn't go into this, but when you are talking to someone and you're asking those questions, so what are the outcomes when you do this? I try to tie it back to what their motivations might be in a situation. So what are the goals, right? The goals are the child gets better at doing whatever it is. Maybe it's less on you, right? So I try to appeal to their benefits to them of using this. You're conveying your message. So it's in talking to them, it's not sort of, as you said, let's bash heads. I'm righter, so then this is wrong. Don't do this, because you know that as soon as you walk out of that room, I'm going to go back to doing what I was. You try to appeal to what are the outcomes that you'd like to see. Well, here's some techniques you might try, and what are the benefits to you and to the child, because they need to see that, especially because some of the techniques that they use immediately benefit them in the sense that it's being reinforced, and they're going to continue to do it if there's no change in the environment. So, yeah. But it's not an easy battle, and you need to be ready when you're dealing with people to hear this argument. I think that you need to educate yourself on what is being said by Alfie, in particular Alfie, but in this realm of I don't want to say it's anti-behavior analysis, because some of the stuff that he says is pretty good, but this notion of attacking behavior analysis, I think another bit of advice is figure it out. It's been out there a lot longer than most of us have been practicing. And don't be surprised when you hear these arguments.
Yeah. We're definitely on the same page here. Being educated and not just like reading the title or listening to people talk about this. When I was reading over some of his work, he talks about the 3 C's of motivation in the classroom: collaboration, content, choice. So collaboration means let's get kids working together. Content, how can you have curriculum that's geared to people to help them actively acquire knowledge to be successful in learning? And then can you give autonomy? Can you give choice in classrooms? I don't know that. Would you argue with any of that? I mean, there's nothing bad that he's saying there.
Nope.
So how do you work within that framework? And in fact, again, like we said earlier, some of the stuff that he says is helpful. I have 3 kids that went through school, and I would love for them to have been in a classroom where they do have more autonomy, where they're treated as young adults who can navigate their way and aren't just being barked at and being told, that, like you were talking about earlier, the characterization or the caricaturization of kids are animals and they're barking, and then you're throwing Rice Krispie treats at them as a reward. Nobody wants their kid in that situation. So if you understand the arguments and you know it well enough, then you can embrace the things that work and say, hey, here's some stuff that I think could enhance this.
Right. Definitely.
And through the back door.
And all 3 of those C's, I'd like them programmed into classrooms. I'd like to have effective, programming choice in, programming collaboration opportunities, effective content. So this is why this particular material is so hard to just dismiss. And that is, it has redeeming things, but it's so misguided in certain aspects. It's hard to navigate if you don't know what's coming at you. And that's why, like I said, even practicing or graduate students can get taken in by this message because it sounds, and some of it is good. But like I said, educate yourself what's deeper in this message so that you can combat this effectively rather than ineffectively.
Well, that brings us to our third secret word, which is discussion. And hey, maybe that you planned that. Let's have a discussion with people.
Right.
This was a good conversation, Doug. I believe we will have more discussions in the future with other people like Kohn. And I feel good talking about these issues because you have to educate folks about that. Hey, some people might not even be aware of Kohn.
Right.
Other people might be very much aware of him, and then understanding what he is saying, I think, is very valuable for everybody. So let me thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you or chatting again in the future on ABA On Call.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.